Good evening, it's Joyful Hermit, an addendum to my most recent video that I just did, and I want to clarify that the person who had initially asked the question about being hidden was just attracted, like I think all of us have been at some point in time or another in our lives, where we have been very much drawn to be away from the temporal world, from the temporal lights, all the people out there who are busy about the temporal world, and rightly so, have to be, or those who are just drawn to it and really aren't drawn to the spiritual life. Some of them haven't even been approached with the thought of it too much, especially with the amount of people who no longer go to church, who say they don't believe in God in national surveys and in world surveys. So, but I got off on a track of also thinking about actually myself way back when I was having a lot of supernatural experiences happening. I was recently separated or divorced, I guess, not quite yet legally, but that took a while. But just all the shock of that, being on my own, having all this pain in my body that I had never had before, up until the accident, and even more so after the surgery in 1987. So then when I became Catholic, and even before I was confirmed, and the first priest was all excited and giving me these books to read, like of Josefa Menendez, and said I was a victim soul and definitely a mystic, and the pain areas I would have. And I read about her stigmata and how she was put off in a cell by herself, was really persecuted for being different, and told you can't speak to anyone of any of these things. Only the confessor who came like once a week, and only the mother superior and the novice mistress, no one else. And she was giving sewing to do and laundry to do. And she couldn't speak French very well, not at all at first, and eventually picked some up. But the whole thing just freaked me out. And I was having more experiences, but of a different nature. I hadn't had any more of the locutions like with Dr. H when he would tape record, of more lengthy, beautiful wisdoms given me and support like that from God or from the Holy Spirit, or Luke or John the Baptist or different people, or Teresa of Avila. And I started having demonic attacks, and I became very intense and all the more prayerful, and would stay after Mass and pray before the tabernacle. And that fall, my second daughter had gone off to college. The first one had gone the year before, and my son was off at school. And a long day he had, and would come home and on a bus, get home maybe at 4 and leave at 7 in the morning. And then we were busy, with his homework at night, or Cub Scouts, and then Boy Scouts as he grew older. So and keeping his, making sure he had his friends and they were over, or he went to their houses, and that kind of thing. I became very intense in my reading, and really, the confessor, this priest, helped keep me in balance somewhat. But he was the one that kept flaming this, because he wanted me to be something other than what I was meant to be. And then he'd be angry when the messages were for him. I was shown things he was up to that God and the Virgin Mary and Jesus didn't like. And then I was taken off of assignment from him. All this was all so new to me. It was like a new world with Catholicism. And in this small town, my hometown, and a lot of stress because long time, lifelong friends from the Methodist Church were distanced. They were upset because I had done that. My parents had cut me off just for 6 months. Thank heavens. My mother. I had a terrible pain siege, and I think my aunt or someone must have told her I was very bad with a long pain siege. It lasted a long time, toward Christmas. Well, probably all those gingerbread houses I had made and baked and put together for my son and all his friends, and then the girls got home from college and they did theirs, and so I did a lot of standing and killing my back, but um, it was very intense. And then I had this old priest from who was a chaplain at the convent, and he helped me to get balanced out because there was a lot of upheaval in my life, and then later on, even in other periods of my Catholicism, where before I became a hermit, before God let me know, even though I'd had hints of it when he told had my grandmother come and from the other side and tell me I was to hibernate like a bear for protection from the world. Back then, if she had said, "You're to be a hermit," oh my, that would have been it. I had no idea. It wasn't anything in the Protestant world. I would have thought, no, my parents had socialized me as a child, even though I was more contemplative and loved being alone, playing and communing with God and with nature and thoughts thoughts of eternity and the other side, even when I was real little, 4 years old and things. So, and of Jesus. So God knows when he's going to introduce something, when it's right for us, when we're ready, when we're being ushered into a new phase where we'll understand and be receptive. He doesn't want to shock us. That's why that first priest, when I learned, yes, discerned priests also, the old spiritual DOS said, yes, this is the wrong person. This isn't good. You can't just, how could you believe things he would say and frighten you like that? And as I'd said before, well, I thought that was just, I was being put through all this torture, emotional and mental, and fears, and his anger at times, the back and forth, to see if I had what it took to be a real Catholic. I was 46, and by then 47 even, and no, 46. No, 45. I was 45, 44 when I converted, and then went through that first year. I was 40, turned 45, and oh, the old priest just like, oh my goodness, no. The Catholic Church isn't brutal like that. There's no hazing ceremony, no testing like that of, if you're good enough or have what it takes, and you can take all kinds of harshness. Well, I'd read some of these old books of, old saints in the past, and all they went through, all the trials, and I thought, well, this is part of it. And in a way, it was, suffering was to be my main vocation. My hermit life was one of suffering, and my spiritual life too, a victim soul of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which I learned about in the early 2000s. So came across that, which has been toned down in the church in the 20th century and now into the 21st. But back in the early 20th century and late 19th century, it was developed, even a group, a little book, Victim Souls of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and a vow you could make, and to be a victim soul. And the Holy Spirit gave me I wrote about it on my blog. I think it's called Victim Souls of Jesus or Victim Souls of the Sacred Heart. It's on blogger.com. And I was given these different levels or different types of victim souls. Everyone can be, and even we can make an offering of ourselves so that if we are in a sudden accident, God can even use that suffering for the good of souls and for our own good and merit, because we offer our suffering in union with Christ. And suffering is not a bad thing. As we know from Jesus, that's how we're saved, is through his dying and suffering on the cross, suffering and dying on the cross. It's a sacrifice, a dying to ourselves, and an offering, and of seeing suffering and pain, not that we're glorifying it, but that it is powerful prayer, and it's utilizable. And in God's view and realm, it's not the horrible thing that we view it as, because we are so tied to the temporal. So yes, all of us have a yearning and a desire at times to get away from the temporal world, to be as if placed in our cell, kept locked away, protected from the world and from the people in it. We so yearn to have that peace and love that we have glimpses of and experiences of from time to time in our prayer, or even at other times when we're alone or with others even, and we feel just drawn away suddenly, or we're out with a group in a beautiful setting, or we're in a church, or just quietly in our homes, and the Holy Spirit comes over us, briefly or for a while. And we feel that peace of the Holy Spirit, the peace of Jesus Christ. And we remember that. So in other times when we're worn out from the everyday grind of our temporal lives, our temporal work, our active lives, something like being a hermit sounds very appealing, or like Padre Pio, being placed, incarcerated basically, in his cell. But that can sound appealing when we're burned out with the world and with our lives, and we long for that quiet. And I was just thinking a half hour ago that I can't wait till I have no responsibility. I'm thinking increasingly of just getting rid of this place when I can get it finished, and having something that is just, I have to do nothing. However, it's the doing, it's the temporal, it's the action that helps keep us balanced. See, so I even just a half hour ago had that longing of chuck it all and just relax in the arms of Christ and wait and read and write and talk about these thoughts. And but that's where I got off from where this person hadn't been going with it. But I started in with why we do need to keep balanced. And we can't just go off and chuck it, especially not those of us who aren't experienced in the spiritual life and in hermit life, silence of solitude. That's why Saint Charbel's superior didn't let all these younger monks who were clamoring, can't let us be hermits like Charbel. No, you must be advanced in years, advanced in the spiritual life, advanced in suffering, advanced in prayer. You have to meet certain spiritual and emotional, psychological, and age standards, life experience standards, and maturity standards, because it's a difficult life. Padre Pio didn't have an easy time of it, and he was already a monk several years and a priest for several years, and a most gifted soul in the spiritual life and in prayer. And he knew how to deal with the devil early on, and he talked with his guardian angel and could see his guardian angel like daily, like off and on, It's just his natural life experience. But being in his cell, cut off from his What hurt him most was not being able to celebrate Mass, not being able, he was stripped of his priestly rights, of all that he'd been through to become a priest, and that he loved most. So he could celebrate Mass by himself. They set up an altar or something in their library, or a little chapel, but he wasn't seen by others. He didn't eat with others. He was like on house arrest in a big way for having done nothing but having experienced and ongoing exterior stigmata, plus his other gifts. But it was the stigmata that was visible and caught on, and the gossip flew out of that monastery into the village and on into Italy. So they had to keep wraps on this thing. And the Vatican was notified, and they sent this unkind person who had been tempted by the devil to evil and to resentment and envy of Padre Pio, who reported back to the Vatican that he was a fraud, that he was causing it himself. Nothing more to be done. Ignore him. Make sure he doesn't ever do anything. Keep him locked up, in other words. But then that all turned around on that man. That, I think he was a Monsignor, something like that. But it all turned against him. But God allowed Padre Pio that tremendous suffering and isolation. There's a difference between having silence of solitude and being isolated and wanting to be away from people in the world for wrong reasons, not just for the break that we all want now and then, but because we've turned against the world. Like the person I know who's very angry against women, very angry against women. And it's at an unhealthy level, very unhealthy level, the amount of anger against women this person has. So, and because of a personal slight, not just a slight, a deep wound that he says is healed, but of course it hasn't. But there's this vicious delight and hope and wish that all women, who are getting divorced get ripped off financially. That's one of his things, and it give me great pleasure to have them. So when things get, when we want away from the world or from people because of reasons that aren't like desires that it sounds good to us, but in reality, if we were faced with it, we'd say, well, hold off here a little bit. I'm not really ready for it. I'm not really ready for that. Let me graduate into it gradually and get used to this over time, and with spiritual guidance, with a priest or someone who's familiar and can help us. And then we also as I've explained to you, how I would go out to do, to get baby clothes and things to give to the Women's Care Center, or to this store that I could get canned goods for the food pantry. And I would have little outings to break the utter solitude and silence that I was in. And I went to daily Mass, sometimes twice a day. But that was still around people. It helped me evolve into being able to manage. But at other times earlier on in my spiritual life, when I got so focused on prayer and on reading and on just very intense, and my old spiritual dog could tell, and he would direct me. He says, now you get out in the garden. And he encouraged me to start planting. He was a great gardener. Oh my, miraculous. Dahlias 10, 12 feet tall, huge. He had He had miracles, and he was a blessed soul, an unusual soul. And he was beloved by everyone except many of the religious sisters in the convent, because they thought they could change the church. And he represented a threat to them of orthodoxy. And he was a male and a priest, and they were very against. They wanted to be priestesses. And they've all died now, and it's very sad. Their whole religious order that was started in 1922, 1924, that was a beautiful order of women, religious nuns who were out in the West mostly, and in Indian reservations, catechizing, helping in brand new dioceses who, were startups in new territories in the fairly recent states. And they did much good in teaching children and mothers, and helped women in general. But in their last 15 years or so, 20 years, they went downhill because they got off their charism, off their purpose, and into this deceit, and joined in with some nefarious group that was a rabble-rouser group. I think it's something very politicized and anti-church, anti-tradition and orthodoxy. And so they just their whole religious order disbanded. They were down to maybe 5 women, and those women have passed away now. So he had that kind of things going on, but he could tell when I was getting out of balance, too intense, unhealthy, too focused in, even sort of sick and pale, or also lots of demonic assaults. And he could tell, because the devil was moving in on me in my weakness, in my imbalance. Get out in your garden. Get out in your garden. Go for a walk. Come visit. We'll talk. We'll laugh. And he had a great sense of humor, great Irish sense of humor and laughter. And we'd talk about things, but nothing. He wouldn't let me get into anything deep spiritually or theologically. And if things got intense with my horrible upset with facing that the temporal Catholic Church had things that weren't right, I was so naive. I thought it was all going to be like the books I read. Everyone was going to be holy, 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 and everyone doing everything by the book and obedient and working together, and everyone at Mass focused and believing with great faith, wanting to read the Bible. Reality hit me. It was human. We're human. I ran into real human beings. Not all canonized saints in every pew. So that was what I got off on in this last video, was to explain that I know from firsthand experience how it can be to get off balance. And I even did before I became Catholic, when I was being bombarded by spiritual experiences happening. And I had, I forget who mentioned it to me. Might have been a woman at the baseball. One of my daughters wanted to play Little League and not girls softball. And she was the first. She was a forerunner. But a lot of the other mothers who went to the church I went to, the Lutheran church, I loved that church, but the women my age were not kindly to the divorcee. And I was a sweet young thing, and They didn't know me. They thought I was after all their husbands, I think. No, I wasn't. Not interested at all. If I'd found someone, it would have been somebody far different than their husbands. Somebody more focused on what I was interested in. They didn't realize all that I was interested in. The spiritual life, God and Jesus, the Bible, and being good. I wouldn't have broken up a family, for pity's sakes. So, anyway, they weren't talking to me. But I sat by some other woman, and she started talking with me. Well, it turns out she was Catholic. And I know God planted her right there. And she was just fine about my daughter playing with her son, and thought good for her. And they had her out, I think, in left field or right field, or, out far. And she had some hits, and she had the time of her life. She felt challenged. My daughter wanted to be challenged. And the girls' softball team wasn't challenging for her. She's now a professional athlete. So, got to go with where your kids are headed in life, and let them try things. So, but this woman then told me about Thomas Merton and said, "Oh, you'd love to read Seven Story Mountain," and that got me on to Merton. And I loved his early books, and I'd already cross-referenced him in a book that a teacher at Beverly Hills High had said to me. First time they invited me to sit at their table. He looked right at me. He says, "You need to read this book. You would like this book." It was like he knew me. I had never met him. But it was Celebration of Discipline by a Quaker. But he referenced a lot of Merton. And also, I think, Richard Foster, I think eventually then converted to Catholicism. And turns out the art teacher was Catholic. Really probably the first Catholic I spoke with as an adult. I was surrounded by Protestants. So it's been an interesting experience. But even in that time period, I got very intent in reading. The devil started attacking, even in the first little house we had, with the children and myself. A lot of demonic occurrences in there, and it was really an overload. I became all the stress of the divorce and the suffering, and another person was in my life who was evil and preyed upon me, and I had to get out of that. It was, I was in a very imbalanced, and I could tell I was not right. I felt unwell. My head felt heavy all the time, very heavy. All these thoughts, too much thought, too much reading at night, heavy reading, and having my mind expanded to things I had not known before. As I read various books and learned more about Catholicism, but not that much, but other religions. I was trying to find what's going on with me with all these spiritual things. And who's going to understand? Well, the Lutherans didn't. The Methodists didn't. I tried different Protestant ministers and things, and I continued to do that in my hometown, but God knew where I would get my answers for all that, and got me right into the Catholic Church. After 10 years, took him 10 years to get me massaged and ready and keep me in balance. And then once Catholic, I had to be kept in balance. And then when I became a hermit, the very next morning, I went back to see the spiritual dog. He wanted me to come talk with him, because he had more that he wanted to tell me. And he gave me the first 3 S's, silence, solitude, and slowness. And then he said, and here's something more. He says, I don't want you to become strange. And I said, what do you mean strange? He says, you know what I mean. Don't become strange. Don't become odd. Don't become closed off as a hermit. A hermit is for God And God is for love, and that includes love of souls, love of people. And hermits are to be hospitable if anyone needs. And he says, you also, even though, let's see, by then was my son, he was in college. No, not yet, but he'd given permission. He was in school, and then he worked, and then had his social life and a band that he started and all this stuff. So he was very busy, but when he got home from school, that's when my orarium stopped, and I was mother. And my old spiritual guide says, these are your priorities, and God would not want it any other way. So don't become odd. And then I did realize what he meant. And I could have been cut off like that because I took it ultra seriously. Too much. So you've got to ease into these things and stay balanced. And that was a lot of my message, but it didn't have to do with the person who was asking the question. What that person really wanted to know was, since they are in the active life and have a job in the temporal world, how can people in active life and in the temporal world who desire, though, to have this union with God, this closeness, this what I call recollection of the soul and the mind and the heart with God, while you're still interacting with other people and doing your work. So I talked about that some in the other video. But then I want to dedicate this in the comments section. Please, viewers out there, keep writing in your way. Those of you who are hermits or are more in silence of solitude without taking hermit vows, or who chose careers or jobs so that you could have that more distance from the temporal world, or those of you who are in the active life but have learned ways that you can weave the silence of solitude, the recollection, the union with God, your prayer life, your inner peace in throughout the day of your temporal world work and life, or with your family even. I remember there was a mother who wrote a very clever book. I think Sunday Visitor published it. My minivan is my monastery. She was feeling that need of, she was busy mother of 5 or 7 children or something like that, and doing the carpooling and figured out ways that she could be recollected, spiritually, inward, communing with God amidst the hectic life and responsibilities in the temporal world of, say, a mother or a father. So I wanted to clarify that of the person who had the question is not off balance at all. In fact, lovely soul. Oh my goodness. Very, very devout and very rich and close with Christ and loves Christ and God and the Holy Spirit, but yearns for more. And the idea of being able to be off in a cell sounded appealing. And it does to all of us from time to time. But this wasn't anything that person was serious about, like a misanthrope and get me away from the world kind of thing. No, wanted to know ideas on how to meld, how to be, let's say, be a everyday hermit, a part-time hermit, or a hermit at heart within, but yet fulfilling the obligations and responsibilities of a busy person in the temporal world of work and family and home and social. How can you be at an office party and connect, but yet still recollect with God, even for an instant or for 3 minutes, or take a break? Or how do you maybe pray and ask God to link you with someone also in that social gathering who is a kindred spirit, who, if you were to meet in that social setting, your conversation might be elevated spiritually or with depth to it, that you would know, you would be refreshed by just a brief conversation, or simply by listening to the other person talk about their own desires for God and recollection, and to be able to get away. And then also, though, I will say, there are retreats. I know lots of parishes. You could, in a larger area or lots of small towns, just check all the Catholic churches around. When are you going to be having an adult retreat, or a men's day away, or a couples retreat away, or a woman's day away or weekend away? And could I come? Could I join in? And there'd be a likelihood that yes, you could. And then sometimes there's retreat centers that run all the time in a diocese or in a group of maybe a larger geographic area, but you can actually go. You can also go to monasteries, like in the Midwest. The Abbey of Gethsemane, Cistercian Abbey, is in Trappist, Kentucky, south of Louisville, maybe 50 miles or hours drive at most, beautiful drive. And there you are at this tremendous abbey that's been there since maybe 1860. 400 acres. Much of it you can walk if you want to walk that much. And mass and confession, spiritual direction you can have. And it's free. You leave a donation. If you can afford, leave a donation. And you can go during the week or you can go on weekends. And check into that. And other monasteries do that. And I think in southern Indiana is St. Meinrad's. There's in Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, you name it, there will be monasteries dotted around, and convents. Generally, the convents don't so much open up to the public for security reasons with the women, and many of them are older. But these are more the contemplative type monasteries that do this. Or like the Benedictines are very much hospitality. So they welcome people in for retreats and sometimes run courses, little short 3-day themed retreats where you have you'll learn things about the spiritual life. So check into that as a getaway. Ask your families or your wife or your husband to treat you to that for your birthday or Christmas gift. Or both go together. And at the Abbey of Gethsemane, there's no talking. And that includes couples. So you can share a room with your spouse, but you're supposed to maintain the rules of silence for the benefit of the other guests who go there to experience silence. And that's a way to get an idea. And it can be difficult for anyone, even for when I would go as a hermit, especially earlier on. All that silence was more than what I was used to, because I would go into Mass and people would be talking. Now there you go into Mass and there's no talking. There you go eat, like you'd be eating out, although I didn't, but there'd be talking. But see, my son would come home, I'd serve him supper, he would talk. I wasn't in total silence until later on when he was off to college. even then, as I said, I gradually transitioned to stay in balance. My Da said, you're not to become strange. And you can be if it's too much too soon than what you're prepared for. God bless His real presence in us, and please leave ideas. Start asking the Holy Spirit for ideas to share. I think this is something that many people want, who are by responsibility and their careers, all their educational background to train for some career. That's the job they're going to have for their adult lives. Yet they long to be recollected and to have that woven throughout their everyday life and their home life in ways that isn't going to be obvious to others at all, but will bring them very close to God, off and on or throughout the day. So let's roll with the prayers, asking the Holy Spirit and God and Jesus, and ask all these hermits and saints on the other side, the great spiritual directors. I'm sure Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross would have suggestions for us. Ask away, ask and ye shall receive. And whatever little ideas come to mind, share. Please share. It will be a wonderful comment section of great benefit to many people, because it's a universal longing. And it's unrealistic. We can't just be put in a cell, even if we want to, even if we'd like 3 days. Not going to happen for us. So, well, for me, it's sort of is, but handyman's coming tomorrow, so there that goes. So, talk to you later and have a blessed night. And thank you for letting me further explain this. I didn't want to leave off that this person was in that mode and was heading to imbalance, and I didn't make a big enough transition or distinction away from what the person really meant in that. And the fact of the matter is that we all would desire that at times, but not mean it. We know that wouldn't happen.